Hi guys, it's me, CHD, and welcome to another episode of the podcast where today, of course, we are reviewing the final Grand Prix of 2024, the 2024 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix that happened yesterday, and it was a decent weekend. The qualifying session on the Saturday was great, but the race on Sunday was forgettable, to say the least. But we did get the conclusion to the season, and things were finally settled on the constructors front, with McLaren winning the Constructors' Championship for the first time since 1998. Congratulations to them. And we'll go through, obviously, the race results. Lando Norris winning the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which is really why McLaren were able to secure the Constructors yesterday. Carlos Sainz finishing in second, Charles Leclerc third. An amazing drive by Leclerc to finish on the podium after starting 19th on the grid, remember. But Ferrari, they did the best they could in the race, but they just needed Norris to somehow drop from first place to get that Constructors' Championship for themselves. But McLaren were just too strong, they're just too quick in over the course of the weekend, really, for Ferrari. Fourth place in his final Grand Prix for Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton. Brilliant drive from him also. Remember, he started 15th on the grid. George Russell, 5th for Mercedes. Max Verstappen finishing in 6th. Of course, had to take a 10-second penalty for colliding with Oscar Piastri on the first lap. 7th, Pierre Gasly. 8th, Nico Hülkenberg. 9th, Fernando Alonso. And 10th, Oscar Piastri for McLaren. And again, congratulations to McLaren on winning the Constructors' Championship. In terms of the championship standings, of course, I will show them at the end of this video, and I will make sure with the driver's side to show the full 24 drivers and who's ended up finishing where, and obviously the Constructors' top 10 as well. But let's start with the race winners and the Constructors' champions, McLaren. And with Lando Norris, fully deserving to win the Constructors. Really should have wrapped up a few races ago. McLaren have had some Grand Prix this year that they should have won, should have done better in, and should have made it more comfortable for themselves coming into the final, say, quarter of the season. But at the end of the day, they still got it done. And even though on the driver's side, they did not put up the best fight they could to win the Drivers' Championship, it is still, of course, a very successful season, winning the Constructors' Championship. And who thought, even just a couple years ago at the end of the 2022 season, when McLaren was so far off the front, and even at the start of 2023 when they got rid of James Key and brought in a new technical team, obviously Andreas Stella was then installed as the new team boss after Andreas Seidel went off to Sauber. It was a very tough time at McLaren in those early months of 2023. Didn't look like they would really be in a position to score points quite a lot of the time in the opening part of that year. And a year and a half later, they have the best car on the grid and are Constructors' champions. So, massive congratulations to them. I think the biggest congratulations need to go to Zach Brown, first off, for obviously, since he took over the team at the end of 2016, had to withstand the back end of the horror that was the McLaren Honda days a few years ago. Was still, McLaren were a joke in 2018 when obviously Zach got rid of the Honda power units, installed the Renault ones, and they were seemingly worse at times in 2018 than they were in 2017. And I think that season was probably the realization for Zach that it was, it wasn't just going to turn around their form by just simply putting in a new power unit into the car. There was going to need to be massive changes within the team. And there was. The first, was the technical side of the team. Obviously, they brought Andreas Seidel in to be team boss. And, of course, he had experience elsewhere in the World Endurance Championship. They brought James Key in. and Andrea Stella, of course, as well, who at the time was an engineer for McLaren. These key signings allowed McLaren to get back in a position where they could be at the front of the midfield, which is pretty much where they were up until, say, the end of 2021. Obviously went from Renault to Mercedes power units in 2021 and won their first Grand Prix in almost 10 years in 2021 as well, which was a great scene at Monza. But then took a step back in 2022. The car just wasn't efficient aerodynamically enough. It wasn't anywhere near good enough, really, for a team like McLaren. That's why they ended up behind Alpine in the championship. And that's why, at the start of 2023, it was decided that changes had to be made. And another person you have to credit a lot for where McLaren have gone from, say, the start of 2023 to now is Andrea Stella, who, of course, was, 2023 was his first season as team boss, I believe. He was a big reason for why that technical reorganization happened and has led it brilliantly. And look at what McLaren have done since then. Once they were able to bring some parts to the car midway through 2023 that represented the technical direction they wanted to go in, they went from midfield cannon fodder to podium contenders and regularly being on the podium in 2023. And then in 2024, continued to build on what they had in 2023, but then with further upgrades, got themselves back to the front of the grid regularly, fighting for race wins. And then, with further upgrades, got to the point where they had, and still do really have, the fastest car on the grid. And with the driver lineup they have as well, which is really strong in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, arguably for 2024 the strongest driver lineup. That's really why McLaren got the job done. So massive congratulations again, have to go to Zach Brown and again from the technical side, Andrea Stella, for the transformation that has been made for this team. And there's no reason why this has to be the only Constructors' Championship McLaren win in this era. There's no reason why next season, for example, McLaren can't win the Constructors or the Drivers' Championship. They've got a very good base to build on for next season. And if they start the season having the fastest car, even if it's not by much, given how well they develop their car through the course of a season, as we've seen this year and last year, if they can keep that up next year, then they might end up in the second half of next season having not just the best car, but by quite a mile the best car on the grid. So this really, if from McLaren's point of view, I think really you have to hope that this is the start of something special at McLaren. And we'll see if that is the case next year. But massive congratulations to McLaren. Lando Norris, brilliant drive in Abu Dhabi, delivered in qualifying when others didn't to get pole position. And then the race was incredibly easy. Obviously, Lando benefiting to a degree from having a very good car, but also drove a brilliant race and did a brilliant weekend where he was pretty much on top for the entire weekend. For Oscar Piastri, shamed at what happened to him in the race. Took out by Verstappen, did well to still get in the points and contribute somewhat to McLaren's final Grand Prix effort in winning the championship. But a shame for Piastri and McLaren that they couldn't have ended up, doing, say, a 1-2 finish, which was definitely on the table for McLaren today. But the Constructors' Championship has been won, and that's all that matters. But like I said, if they start next year, which they should do, really, because there's no new regulations for next year. If they start next year with the car they have got now at the end of this season, then, again, with how well they develop over the course of a season, there's no reason why McLaren can't win both the Constructors and Drivers' Championship next year. So, congrats to them. Going on to Ferrari, did the best they could, as I said. Carlos Sainz obviously benefiting quite a bit from Verstappen and Piastri's collision. And after that, I have to say, really up until those final, say, 10 to 15 laps, he gave it everything. He pushed Norris as hard as he could, kept the gap down at only 2 to 3 seconds. Obviously, Ferrari tried the undercut, and they did get not that far behind Norris, only like a second and a half behind when Norris eventually came out from his pit stop. So Ferrari tried everything. Carlos Sainz tried everything. He pushed as hard as he could, but it just wasn't to be because McLaren and Norris were just too quick. So, fair play to Sainz for a brilliant drive and a good season from the Spaniard. Not as good as his teammate, but a good season, and has had some great form in this second half of this season. Charles Leclerc, though, probably you could argue driver of the day. I personally think Lewis Hamilton was driver of the day. But Leclerc, yeah, what a drive. The start he made, 19th up to 8th place, overtaking 11 cars on the first lap. Of course, 2 of those were Max and Oscar having their collision, but still. And I think one of the other ones was Tsunoda stalling on the grid, but still, 8 overtakes on the first lap is incredible, especially on a track like the Abu Dhabi one, which is not exactly the easiest at times to overtake, especially at the chicanes, where he actually got moves done. Leclerc, super drive, did the absolute best he could, and 33 points was a really good points haul for the team, considering going into the weekend and looking at the what happened in practice. Ferrari didn't look like they would even likely be on the podium in the race, but to get both cars on there, you got to give credit where credit's due. And as was discussed on yesterday's live stream in the build-up to the race between me and Niblo, obviously who joined me in commentating on the race yesterday, even though Ferrari have not won the championship this year, it's definitely been a positive year. Because remember where Ferrari were a year ago? They were, I think, did they finish second at the championship last year? I think they may have done it, or was second or third. It was something like that. But they were miles away from Red Bull, who won the championship. Everybody was. And even though they were able to contend for a race win here or there, in 2023, the fact of the matter is they only ended up with 1 race win. They knew what was wrong with the car and fixed, not all of it, but most of it at the start of 2024, which is why they started the year probably with the second best car ahead of McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin. But Red Bull was still about half a second a lap quicker than them in the first 5-6 races or so, even though they were able to get that brilliant 1-2 finish in Melbourne at the start of the season. But, obviously won the Monaco Grand Prix as well. But after what was a really bad stretch of form after that Monaco win, where they just dropped off a cliff in terms of performance, and they were at times closer to the midfield than they were actually to the front of the field. They weren't even on the podium. I think it was for 4 or 5 races, I think it might have been, that they weren't on the podium in the middle of the season. I think maybe Carlos Sainz had a podium in Austria, but except for that, around that time, again, podiums were not coming for the for the Ferrari team. But then, couple weeks before the summer break finished, found a solution to their problems. The problems, I believe, was to do with the suspension setup of the car and how it was interacting with the other parts of the car. And seemingly, like I said, a couple weeks before the summer break, were able to find a solution. And then we saw something we haven't seen in a while from them. We saw them actually have better race pace than they did in qualifying, which is something we've been crying out for this team for years. For years, Ferrari have been very quick in qualifying and then always slower by probably 2 to 3 tenths at least compared to the rest of the field in the race. But in the second half of this season, it was the other way round. If they were, say, a couple tenths off pole in qualifying, they'd end up being right on the pace, if not a tad quicker, than whoever was on pole in the actual race itself. And that is something Ferrari must keep up in terms of the characteristics of their car for next year, because even if they don't get a lot of pole positions and they qualify a lot of the time, say third on the grid, if they have a car on race day that can consistently fight for race wins and get Leclerc or Hamilton second and third a lot of the time, that will help massively, not just for the Constructors' Championship, but for the Drivers' Championship as well. So I really hope they keep that characteristic of the car next year. And then, second half of the season, they continue to build on the improvements they made, then brought a big upgrade at Monza, which transformed the performance of the car to the point where they won the Italian Grand Prix. What a drive that was from Leclerc. Baku should have won that race, but it really was lost because of the amazing performance by Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. But we're still able then to go on and win the US and Mexican Grand Prix. So, yeah, very good second half of the season. And Ferrari, again, given where they were at the mid-season point, say around the Austrian and British Grand Prix, nobody at that time thought Ferrari were going to be remotely close to the Constructors' champions by the end of the season. I was saying Ferrari should just scrap the development on the car and just focus on next year, because I didn't see Ferrari finding a way out of the predicament they were in, but they did. So credit to them for that. And yeah, they got to the point where they nearly won the Constructors' Championship. And if you actually look at the second half of the season, on race day, Ferrari were, I'm pretty sure, the better performers than McLaren. So if only they had not had that dip after Monaco and before, say, the Hungarian Grand Prix, that stretch of races where it was, Montreal, Barcelona, Austria, Silverstone, if they didn't have that dip in form then, they probably would have won the Constructors' Championship. So, yeah, disappointing that they had that, but it's not exactly a surprise for Ferrari. They do tend to dip in the middle of the season. But looking ahead to next season, if Ferrari can start the year off with a very good car, if not maybe the fastest car, and develop nicely over the season and make sure they don't fall behind like they did middle of the season, then there's no reason why Ferrari can't win the championship next season. Fred Vasseur has got this team performing, I think, operationally and even maybe technically at the best it's performed at in years. And they are 100% for next year strong championship contenders, especially with a driver like Charles Leclerc in their car, who I think's had a really top season, proving why he is one of the best drivers in Formula One. Lewis Hamilton, of course, joins next season. Let's hope he gets back to the levels even of 2023 or 2022, never mind his absolute peak of, say, 4 or 5 years ago, because Leclerc and Hamilton at their peak is what we all want, especially if Ferrari are fighting for the championship. So, yeah, Ferrari, if you're a Ferrari fan, I would be excited for next season. I wouldn't get too overexcited because we know how Ferrari can sometimes disappoint us. But Ferrari can definitely win the championship next year. There's no way anyone can sit there and say that Ferrari have got mostly or no chance at all to win the championship next year. After what I've seen this year and how competitive things are going to be next year, I don't see why they can't pick up quite a few race wins and at least win the Constructors' Championship. So yeah, we will see how the Scuderia do in 2025. But in this Grand Prix, did very well. Now let's go on to Mercedes quickly. Yeah, Lewis Hamilton, driver of the day for me, because even though Leclerc came from further back to finish in third, the Ferrari was clearly quite a bit quicker in the race than the Mercedes was. So it was harder to do in the Mercedes, come from near the back of the grid to where Hamilton ended up finishing. And Hamilton ended up only about 5 seconds off the podium, despite having to start on the hard tyres, which for the first 10 laps or so, he had no real pace on, to be honest. So yeah, Hamilton did a fantastic race and a fantastic conclusion to his Mercedes career in terms of this Grand Prix, not the season, obviously. I mean, you know, he had a couple race wins this year. It was great to see him getting back to the top step of the podium. That win at Silverstone is always going to be remembered as a classic Grand Prix. And if you're a Hamilton fan, a pretty emotional one, given the, you know, the troubles he had of going, you know, 2.5 years without a win and then finally wins at Silverstone as well. So, you know, there will be some things from this season for Hamilton fans and Lewis Hamilton himself to remember. But now it's time to go to Ferrari, and let's hope he gets back to his best. Because, again, if he does get back to even the levels he was at in 2023, where I thought he was probably the second or third best driver on the grid that year, if the Ferrari car is right up there fighting for race wins on a regular basis, there's no reason why Lewis Hamilton can't win his 8th World Championship in 2025. No reason at all. So, you know, it's all about him, really, Hamilton, as long as the car is there, of course, which it should be. So we'll see what happens next year. For George Russell, not the greatest drive necessarily, but Mercedes just weren't quick. I know they finished 4th and 5th, but they had the 4th best car in Abu Dhabi, which was quite poor for them, considering especially how they've been lately, and especially after practice, where they didn't actually look that bad at all. So, yeah, Russell, I think, doing the best he could, really. There was just no real pace there in the Mercedes to be on the podium. Great season, though, for George Russell. He's been consistently really good. Has destroyed Lewis Hamilton in qualifying this year, which is going to help his reputation quite a bit. And has been definitely one of the top 5 drivers on the grid this season. No doubt about that in my mind. So, yeah, Russell, I think, if he can keep this level up next year, and Mercedes can actually start the year with a good car, or a car that's not that far off the front-running pace, maybe only, 0.3 of a second or so, rather than nearly a second, then maybe George Russell can pick up a few more wins and maybe be a dark horse contender for the championship if Mercedes improve well over the course of the season. But with Mercedes, I do not see them as championship contenders next year, because they still have issues on the technical side of their team. As well, with the wind tunnel, they have quite a bit of issues with that. Still correlation issues. That's why not all the upgrades that Mercedes bring to the car actually work. Some of them do, some of them don't. So, until that is fixed, then I don't think Mercedes can really win a championship. And again, starting the year with such a bad car isn't helping either. But we'll see how they get on next year. And of course, very keen to see how Kimi Antonelli does. A very exciting young driver he is. And quite possibly, Antonelli, the next Hamilton, the next Verstappen. And we'll see next year if he can prove that. And I think definitely by this time next year, we will know whether Antonelli is the next special one in terms of special talent going forward. And we'll quickly touch on Red Bull. Max Verstappen, his race was destroyed after what he did on the first lap. And, dived down the inside of Piastri. I think he was fair in, going for the move, but he just committed too aggressively to it. He didn't give himself a chance to back out. He just went for it, and the collision happened and bounced over the curb, which ended up pushing him into Piastri. For a moment, I was forgetting what happened to Sergio Perez in this race, but I remembered that, Valtteri Bottas knocked him out on the first lap. By the way, the Verstappen-Russell video I did a couple of days ago, still doing really well. That collision between Max and Oscar proves what I said in that video in terms of what Russell claims Max said to him after they were in the stewards' room in Qatar, where Russell claimed that Max said, I wasn't even going to fight you, I was going to let you through. that incident with Piastri for Verstappen on the first lap here proves that is bullshit, because you can clearly see, there's clear evidence that Max, even in races where there's nothing on the line, is going to be super aggressive and try and go for it, because that's the way he is. It doesn't matter what's on the line. Max is going to go for it no matter what. And leave no stone unturned. That's the way Max Verstappen is as a person. So, yeah, just thought I'd mention that. But yeah, poor end to the season there for Red Bull, but they still ended up winning one of the championships. Max Verstappen winning the Drivers' Championship. And Max, really, for that, has only himself to thank, because he's the reason he won the championship. You can't sit here like you could last year and say, well, Red Bull were just way too good for everybody else. Max, he was clearly the best driver this season, no doubt about that. So congratulations to Verstappen for winning his 4th World Championship. But next year, it's going to be some effort for him to win 5 in a row next year, especially if Red Bull start the year off with a car that is not necessarily way off the pace, but if it's around the pace of McLaren, and say the same pace as McLaren and Ferrari as well, then I think Red Bull, I don't think necessarily are going to struggle over the course of the season. I can see them winning a few races, but if Verstappen can win the championship over the course of a whole season, having a car that is about equal to a couple other teams, or if not clearly slower, then Max, without a doubt, will be one of the all-time greats, for me at least. Because that would be just incredible to beat that caliber of driver in a car not that quick. Because next year, likely, he's going to be going up against, for the championship, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. And that is some very tough competition, but if he still comes through and wins it in the end, then you can't deny that he's one of the top probably 3 or 4 greatest drivers at least of all time. So yeah, very keen to see where that Red Bull's at next season and what Verstappen can do in it. Congrats to Alpine, by the way, securing 6th in the championship. Pierre Gasly, what a season he has had. Scoring so many points in the last few races of the season, to the point where Gasly has secured 10th in the championship, a position that none of us predicted him to finish in because of the way Alpine started the season. So congrats to Pierre Gasly for an amazing end to the season. Nico Hülkenberg obviously finishing the points, great weekend from him. If only he had not had that grid penalty, would have been interesting to see where he would have ended up at the start, but he would have realistically ended up probably 7th at best in the race anyway. So yeah, congrats to him. Alonso finishing in 9th, good drive from him. Please, Aston Martin, develop your car next season. Do not leave Alonso in a position next season where he is just in a car that's rotting away, which is basically what he's had to put up with this season. The car at the start of 2024 wasn't really that far off, the McLaren, the Ferrari, and the Mercedes. It was in there. I mean, remember the Chinese Grand Prix where Alonso was right in there with those drivers fighting for the podium positions. And then once we got to Miami and then Imola, Aston Martin dropped off completely. And they went a few races where they couldn't even score a point. So, please, Aston Martin, give this guy a car worth staying around to drive for. Because remember, this guy, Alonso's 43? So, he doesn't want to be driving a god-awful car anymore. Of course, Adrian Newey starts his job in March, so we'll see what he can do and maybe help the team during the season. But yeah, really hoping that Aston Martin can actually develop the car over the course of the season. The problem is, though, I believe Aston Martin have been using Mercedes' wind tunnel, which also has been problematic for the Mercedes team in terms of correlation from the wind tunnel to the track. I don't know, though, if Aston Martin's new wind tunnel is going to be operational next year. And whether they're going to use it for 2025 or they're going to focus on 2026. Of course, 2026, very important for Aston Martin, the new era. If they're, no better in 2026, then the project has been a gigantic failure from them. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes for Aston Martin. But I'll flash up on screen your Drivers' Championship standings. And as I said earlier, I will make sure to show the rest of the order below the top 10. Like I said, Pierre Gasly doing so well to end up in 10th place, just ahead of Nico Hülkenberg, who was looking a certainty to finish in the top 10, but Gasly ended up nicking it in the end. Tsunoda having a good season as well in the midfield. And then the rest you can see as you go down. Obviously, Oliver Behrman still ending up beating a few drivers despite only doing 3 races over the course of the season, but was helped a bit by being in decent cars for those 3 races. The Haas obviously has been one of the best midfield cars, and then obviously the Ferrari car he was in Saudi Arabia. But yeah, 24 drivers we have had racing in 2024. Quite a lot. And then obviously I'll show on screen the Constructors Championship, and just an illustration really with the Constructors, how close it's been. The top 3 teams ending up within or less than 100 points of each other. So it just shows you just how close it's been in 2024. And 2025 does promise to be a fantastic season. I think definitely the possibility of a 3-way fight in terms of the teams for the Constructors' Championship, say Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari. I think pretty strong chance. And then for the Drivers' Championship, if the Red Bull and McLaren and Ferrari are all on the same, say, pace in the first Grand Prix in Melbourne, then really the championship battle at least should be Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, and then if Lewis Hamilton can return to form, throw him in there as well. And then if Oscar Piastri can step up and make some more improvements, you can throw him in there as well. So we are looking at potentially a 5-way fight for the Drivers' Championship in 2025. And who knows, maybe Mercedes will actually have a good car next year. You could throw Russell and Antonelli in there as well. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing what the championship battle is going to be. But definitely there will be a Drivers' and Constructors' Championship battle next season. There's no doubt about that. And then with the midfield, should be really interesting. Aston Martin, of course, we'll see how they start the season. How they start the season really will dictate how they go on. Alpine should next season be pretty strong for the whole year, given how well they've ended this year. Haas should be strong next season. Williams, I think, will be better next season, especially with Carlos Sainz in the team. Sauber, you would hope, will be better next season. They definitely did improve in these final couple races before the end of the year, so let's hope they carry that momentum through to the start of next season. Racing Bulls, I'm not sure about. I don't have a great feeling about them, honestly, for next season, but yeah, I think definitely Williams will improve. How Alpine overall will be better than how they started this year. So yeah, watch out for Williams and Alpine. We'll just see in general how the midfield shakes out. But guys, thank you very much for coming along to this podcast and all the other podcast episodes I've done since the summer, where I've been reviewing the Grand Prix. We're on, I think, is it episode 15 or something by now? The podcasts, by the way, will continue into the winter. They're not going to be weekly, but when there is a bit of news or something to talk about, then I will do a podcast recording and get it up on the channel. So don't worry, I will do probably a couple podcasts at least over the winter. Obviously, if there's not a lot of news, then, can't really, can't really do one. But if we get enough news, then I definitely will, jump on and talk for, say, half an hour as I normally do. As I said over the race weekend, I've got some plans for content over the winter. In terms of the rest of this week, on Sunday, I will be live at 1 p.m. UK time to review the 2024 Formula 1 season. Couple days before that, maybe 3 days before that, either Thursday or Friday this week, I am going to upload my F1 2024 driver rankings video, where we're going to rank every driver from 24th to 1st, and then obviously let you guys have your opinion as well. So yeah, I'm going to do that, and that will again be uploaded probably Thursday or Friday. And I will also show that on the live stream on Sunday, because it does go along with the season review stuff. And then once we get after Christmas and New Year, there will be hopefully a few recorded videos for you guys to enjoy over the winter. But guys, thank you for coming along to this podcast episode. Make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Make sure to smash the like button as well on this podcast. And until my next video, ranking the drivers for 2024, and my live stream this Sunday, going over the 2024 Formula 1 season as a whole. Reminder, 1 p.m. UK time is when I'll be live for that. Until then, guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.